Our New Testament reading, we continue in the Gospel according to Mark, still in chapter 1, but today beginning at verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening, at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The ministry of Jesus is moving fast. To recap, just 4 weeks ago, we read about John in the wilderness and Jesus presenting himself for a baptism of repentance. Jesus was dunked in the Jordan River, and when he came out of the waters, God put the divine claim on him, saying, "You are my son, the beloved. In you I am well pleased." Next, Jesus was calling to fishermen mending their nets and inviting them to fish for people instead. And last week, Jesus spoke in the synagogue in Capernaum with a voice of authority. He spoke not as a scold telling you what was wrong with you, but as someone who was on your side, someone you really wanted to listen to, someone who might just be able to drive out your demons. Which brings us to today. Immediately after leaving the synagogue, Jesus goes to the home of Simon, which is to say Simon Peter, and his brother Andrew. James and John are along for the ride. Peter's mother-in-law is sick. She's in bed with a fever. We don't know exactly what is going on with this woman, though we can guess that a fever at a minimum is a sign of infection. You or I would be headed off to the walk-in for antibiotics. That is not an option in first century Palestine. An infection, whether caused by a wound or some airborne illness like bronchitis or the flu, it would be a serious matter, most of all for the very young and the very old. She's probably seriously ill. And of course, they tell Jesus, possibly because Jesus is a compassionate listener, but more likely because Jesus has already earned their trust. Preaching, teaching, healing, praying. Jesus is doing all these things. And his still small band of close followers already trusts completely that Jesus will be able to do something about this woman's fever. And he does. Takes her by the hand. He raises her up. In Greek, it's the same verb that they use for resurrection. He raises her up, and she is well. She feels so well, in fact, that she begins to serve them. Now, there's that word again, serve. In the Greek, it's diakonei, that word from which we get deacon. So yes, it's possible that the service took the form of bringing food to her guests, a timeless expression of hospitality in every single culture. But it's equally likely that Peter's mother-in-law entered into Jesus' ministry. She served, just as his new disciples were learning to serve, just as Jesus himself was already serving. Part of the call of following Jesus is taking part in his ministry. to preach, teach, feed, heal, and pray, to bring the good news of God's reign to the people. And the good news is that healing comes in many forms. For some, it's the relief of a fever and a return of strength to the body. Maybe for others, it's month after month of good blood work. For others, it could be something else entirely. So a few years ago, I got it into my head that maybe the source of Peter's mother-in-law's fever was something else entirely. Realizing that the presence of mother-in-law strongly implies the presence of wife and perhaps children, I wondered whether this woman had a different kind of a fever, a different kind of a sickness. I wondered whether she was heartsick, enraged, horrified, mortified that her son-in-law had abruptly left both family and obligations for life on the road with Jesus. I wondered whether she was sick with fear and worry. So, what if Jesus reaching out his hand to Peter's mother-in-law is the kind of healing that says, don't be afraid. You won't be abandoned. We've got you. I spent last week at a conference for women in ministry and church leadership, and it was designed to help us know and understand ourselves better so that we could be not only more effective as pastors and leaders, but also more authentic in all our relationships. One of the premises of the system that we studied was that each of us has what they call a particular childhood wound, a way in which our needs were not met as little children. Even though we may have wonderful parents, none of us is immune to this wound. We may have learned it's not okay to be vulnerable or to trust other people. We may have learned it's not okay to assert ourselves, or that it wasn't okay to make mistakes, or that it wasn't okay to have needs. We might have grown up believing that it wasn't okay to have our own feelings or identity, or maybe we came to believe it wasn't okay to be too happy, or to be comfortable in the world, or to trust ourselves. Maybe we grew up believing that we should never depend on anyone else for anything. We all came to adulthood with these wounds, or so the theory goes. One of these wounds. But here comes Jesus, and you know what he would say to us if he were reaching out his hand and taking us by the hand and raising us up. He would say, "Rise up, my daughter. You will not be abandoned. Rise up, my son. Your presence is important to me. Rise up, my child. You are good. You are wanted. Rise up, for you are loved for who you are and not merely for what you do. Rise up. I see you for who you are. Rise up. I care about your needs. Your needs are not a problem. Rise up. You are safe. Rise up, my child. You can depend on others, and you can depend on me." The next thing we see in this gospel reading is that all the people are streaming to where Jesus is. They surround the little house he is staying in. The whole city is at the door. Everyone, it seems, has something for which they need to be healed. We are all here because, to some extent or another, we've all felt the call to follow Jesus, to preach, teach, feed, heal, and pray right alongside him, to bring the good news of God's reign to the people, to let them know that heaven starts here and now, not in some far-off place later. And sometimes that means not only being agents of healing for others, but receiving healing, letting God's healing come to us. We're called to heal in that way too. We may not feel that we have that particular amazing gift of Jesus's, of being able to lay hands on someone and relieve them of a fever or cast out a demon. But isn't it possible that we can offer another kind of healing to one another? That we can say to one another, I see you. You are loved for who you are. You matter to me, to us. You don't have to go through whatever it is alone. Let me say it to you now. You are loved. You matter. You don't have to go through whatever it is alone. You are God's beloved child, and that is enough. Thanks be to God. Amen.